All right, now we're going to talk about major scales. Major scales are very important to understand and to be able to recall and construct. They serve as a reference point for just about everything we do in theory. And what we want is for theory to be a tool that you can use to make you a better performer, better songwriter, better producer. So this is a central thing to music theory. If you'll look at your workbook on the bottom half of page 10, you'll see number 11, major scale construction. So number 1, a scale has 8 pitches called scale degrees or scale steps. I'm going to use C as my reference point. In the past, a lot of the time in the videos, I've used A because that's the beginning of the alphabet and the musical alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. And so that would be an easy way just to think about the letter names in the musical alphabet. But as it turns out, the major scale that's the easiest to get a grip on for most folks starts on C. So that's what we're going to start. 8 pitches, or scale degrees, scale steps. So we're just talking about numbering the notes in the scales, what that comes down to. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that's the first scale degree. The second note in the scale is the second scale degree. The third note in the scale is the third scale degree, and so forth. There are 8 successive letter names in the musical alphabet. In this case, we're starting on C. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Of course, it always starts over after G with A, B, C. So all the notes in the musical alphabet are represented there. And then C happens at the beginning and the end of the scale. Number 2, scales ascend or descend through a series of whole steps and half steps. We talked about half steps earlier. The next adjacent key, up or down, is a half step away. This is not the next adjacent key. The closest one to C going up is that C sharp. So there's a half step. A whole step is 2 half steps, or the distance of 2 half steps. So if we go up a half step, another half step, we have a whole step. There's a whole step. Going down a whole step would have to go down 1, 2 half steps. That's a whole step down from C. So you've got a series of whole steps and half steps. It's a very specific order and number of each. And not only do most scales include 2 half steps and the rest will be whole steps, as it says on the page, with major scales, all major scales include 2 half steps in the sequence and the rest are whole steps. Now on the staff, when we write it down, we're going to write these scales on 8 successive lines and spaces. We just go line, space, line, space, line, space. Or if you start on a space, you go space, line, space, line, space, line. We don't skip any. So let's use C again as our example. This is middle C. It's on the first ledger line below the treble clef. There's middle C. All right, so there's the first ledger line below the staff. Here's the space below the staff on D. First line, first space, second line, second space, third line, third space. Let's talk briefly now about building a scale that might start, say, 1 note lower than C. If you started on this note, the B, that is below the first ledger line, below the treble clef, the step below C, so there's B on that space below that ledger line. There's C on the first ledger line underneath the treble clef. And there's D, there's the space below the staff. And now we finally get onto the staff with the E, and the F, and the G, and the A, and the B. So it's important to get all the notes in there. When you start on B, go to the next ledger line and do a line, and then go to the next space, It's important not to skip that space and get that space in there, and then get your notes going on up on the staff. Major scales always have the half steps between 3 and 4 and 7 and 8. There's 2 different places where half steps occur. If a scale has half steps at any other place, it's not a major scale. So what are we talking about when we say 3, 4, and 7, and 8? Well, that goes back to the scale degrees that we were talking about at the beginning of the discussion. 1, 2, 3. There's the scale degrees, first, second, third. There's the fourth one. So between 3 and 4, you've got a half step. 2, 3, and 4. And going on, 5, 6, 7, and 8. 7 and 8, 3 and 4. We're in the key of C. There are no sharps or flats in the key. We can get the major scale to sound correctly and get the right whole steps and half steps in place, all on the white keys. Notice that E and F, B and C are those natural half steps we've spoken about before. Now the interval structure of all major scales is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. This is important to remember, important to recall, just to make sure you have the one of the major concepts of the major scale in place at all times. It'll be on the first test, by the way. So let's look at that. Here we are with C again. So we have to have 2 whole steps to begin with. So here's the first one. Here's the second whole step. Now the first half step. 3 more whole steps. Here's 1 whole step, another whole step, a third whole step, and finally that last half step. So there's the order. There's the sound. And the major scales have to have that particular order of whole steps and half steps to be a major scale. In C major, the half steps coincide with the white keys that are half steps apart, as we just said. They're called natural half steps. There's no sharp or flat required to get those half step intervals. For all the other major scales, for a major scale starting on any other note than C, you've got to have accidentals in place so that all the whole steps and half steps fall in the correct places. Let's think about a G major scale. It'll start on G. Here's the G on the second line of the treble clef. So let's do that whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half sequence again from G. So here's the starting note. We have our first interval of a whole step there on the second note of the scale. Another whole step. Now here's that first half step. So far, so good. We got 3 more whole steps and a half step. Whole step, and we can't use this because it's a half step away from the 6th note in the scale. We got to do a whole step, which means we have to play a black key. Finally, the last half step goes from F sharp here to the G. Sounds correct. Sounds like a whole major scale. Whole, whole, half. Whole, 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 half. And once again, for any scale starting on a note other than C, we will have to have some kind of accidental, some kind of sharp or flat, some black keys in there to get the correct order and thus the correct sound of a major scale.